the bookkeeping is like this really important practice because it essentially unearths all the valuable data that you need to analyze your company. So if you didn't do, if there at least wasn't a partner in a company that was doing that, that would make me nervous, and I just happen to be that person who liked doing it and, was capable of doing it.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a fun one. Our guest is a former owner of a Los Angeles-based multi-million-dollar production company and is now the founder of a finance business and real estate firm called Play Louder. Joe DeSanto, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me, man.
It's great to have you. It's great to have you. And you had sent some information about what you do and your perspective of the industry and working with small business owners and positioning your services. And it just absolutely blew my mind. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and I know our listener is going to love it as well. But before we get into all of it, Joe, tell us about your career journey leading up to this point.
All right. Well, I was born on September 4th, 1975. No, it was, let's see. My career up to this point has been predominantly in the kind of entertainment and advertising spaces. Up until about 2 years ago, I was in Los Angeles for about 20 years and owned with my partners and friends, both a post-production company and then subsequent to that, a production company as well. And we did work mainly for, not mainly, I guess, a combination of advertising, like making television commercials, the film business, so making films and documentaries, making television shows, and then, all other assorted media, I like to call it, some music videos. I mean, there's so much media online now, obviously. So getting into making, whatever media for brands or entertainment related media to live online was much bigger in the last 5 to 10 years. But yeah, I just I was actually a photography major in college and set out to New York originally for a couple of years and luckily found post-production, which if people don't know what that is when you're making a movie or a television commercial or whatever, the first thing you do is production. So you get a film crew together and you shoot the material, the raw material, get it in the can, as they say. That reference actually comes from back when you shot on film. The film would come in an actual can. You would load it in the camera, and then after it was exposed, you put it back in the can. So you get it in the can. Now it's get it in the drive, I guess.
Get it in the cloud.
Get it in the cloud. And so after you shoot it, you then send the raw material over to a post-production company. And what happens there is it gets edited. We call that kind of creative editing. It used to be called offline editing, but I won't get into why that. But creative editing. And then, in addition to editing, there's visual effects, there's graphic design animation, there's color correction, there's sound design, sound editing, and then ultimately the video and audio mastering. And then we would deliver the final product to whether that be, the studio or the network or whatever it had to go. And it used to go on a videotape up until probably about 10 years ago. And now it just gets delivered as a file, usually on a hard drive. So I got into that business. And luckily I found I was originally going to be kind of a photographer. So I thought, but luckily got introduced to post, which is kind of like, an extension of photography, like digital imaging and moving images, essentially motion pictures, as it were. And it was a business that I was, one thing I should back up and say, like I was always interested in business. So like in my family, we owned a plumbing and heating business. So, the idea, I do credit that a lot. Like, when you're young and if your family like owns a business, it makes the idea of owning a business, I don't know, I feel like kind of more normal, it's not this unattainable thing. So I always wanted to own a business of some kind, I felt like, but I was also always kind of creative. Well, I guess I'm both like kind of numbers and art, kind of a brain.
Interesting.
So in the back of my mind, I guess I was, thinking at some point in my life, I started a business. I didn't know exactly what business that would be, but when I got introduced to post-production earlier in my career, luckily I liked it, but luckily it was also the perfect endeavor for, a small business. And when our business kind of averaged around 30 to 40 employees, depending what was going on. In our biggest year when we had a couple of big productions going on, we probably peaked at about 60 employees that year. But so not a small endeavor, that's a lot of people to wrangle. But I guess at the end of the day, it's still a small business. But the businesses I work for now range anywhere from 3 employees up to 40, which is actually, I still work for my old company just as in a consulting capacity, which I'll explain if you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got into the post and I saw it as a career I liked, but also as a potential, kind of business that I would enjoy owning. And I just set my sights on that. And inevitably, it came to pass. I did have a goal of starting my own business by the age of 30. Which kind of wasn't, I guess, a relatively arbitrary goal, really. I mean, you have to pick, these goals. But and it happened. Actually, we opened the doors 2 months after my 30th birthday, so it was pretty close.
Wow.
And that was in the end of 2005. So really, by the time we actually kind of opened, it was January 2006. And then I was in the business with my partners up until 2018. When I decided to kind of blow up my life. My wife and I decided to leave Los Angeles, like kind of with the attempt to work less so that we could spend more time with our son, who was 3 years old at the time. So in middle of 2008, we managed to kind of divest ourselves of what we had going on in LA and get on a plane and entered a whole new journey, which has been very interesting, rewarding, and scary too, all at the same time. But it's also created this natural segue into the new work that I'm doing, which is essentially working as a independent CFO for small businesses. And the way that happened was when I was kind of working out my departure with my partners at the time. They said to me, hey, you've been managing the finances this whole time, among many other things. And they're like, we're going to have to figure out how to find other people to do all the things you're doing. So they were like, hey, would you be interested in us just paying you, a monthly retainer to keep managing the finances? You could probably do that from wherever, in today's day and age. This was pre-COVID. And so it turned out I was kind of like a little ahead of the curve on the working from home thing. And I said, yeah, that'd be awesome, because really I didn't have we didn't have quite a defined plan about like the next phase of work and how we're going to make money. So I was like, yeah, that'd be perfect. And then I was doing that and then talking to other friends who own businesses in Los Angeles. And they were like, hey, are you doing that now? Can you do that for us? Because we really need someone to like manage our money and manage our finances. And, before you know it, I had like 5 or 6 clients. And that is pretty much how I'm making money today. I mean, I luckily did pretty well over my main work career. So I kind of describe myself a little bit as semi-retired in that I'm working part-time and that's enough, given our scenario. But the money that I am making is coming from this independent kind of CFOing, which a large portion of that work and the foundation of that work is bookkeeping. And truth be told, before I was calling it independent CFOing, if that's a term, I was jokingly calling it bookkeeping with benefits, which is actually a really like perfect way to describe what I was doing for people and what I am currently doing for people. So I don't know if that, if I meandered there, if that made sense at all.
It makes total sense. Couple of things. I love always hearing about people who have these goals that think, oh, gee, well, by 30, I'm going to have a business. I mean, it's like you've created the future. And sure enough, as much as you may think, oh, gee, that's just kind of like a whimsical dream, the whimsical dream written down and thought about actually do often come to fruition. So it's another win in the win column of, hey, set your sights on things that you want, what you desire, and eventually it comes about. And then I also love the story of the art that you have, the numbers, and now you're living that out in your bookkeeping with benefits business, which you call Play Louder. And it's a part-time CFO work that you do for businesses. Tell me about now you're not a bookkeeper by trade. That wasn't your training. That wasn't what you set out to do. You kind of fell into it likely through building your own business and doing a lot of that work. But what was that journey a little bit like?
Yeah, I'm not a bookkeeper by trade, and like I said, I was an art major in college. But I've always been, financially oriented. I was always good at math. Number one, it was, I was more of a math than, English person. I did way better on the math SATs and all that. But early on in my life, like my parents, I had mentioned my, family owned a business when that was my dad, and my parents split up, and it's kind of a rough divorce, and we kind of didn't have contact with my dad for a while, and our financial situation just got pretty bad because my mom ultimately, God bless her, she's an awesome woman, but she's not very financially oriented. And back in those days, she got married, when she was 19, had 4 kids, was a homemaker, and then all of a sudden, like after 25 years of marriage, was divorced and trying to take care of the 2 younger kids, and didn't have much earning potential and didn't have any financial skills. And I very quickly realized how terrible that can be and what a detriment that can be to your life, to not have developed any financial skills. And I think that kind of set me on a path of being very just financially, prudent and frugal. Not so. I don't know if I consider myself super frugal, but I'm prudent and I'm smart with money. And so I started working at an early age and understood how hard it is to earn money, number one, and what you want to do to try to keep it and be prudent with it. And in college, just because I kind of, I was paying for college with a lot with grants and stuff because I had good grades, but I did have student loans, and also I worked and had credit cards, and I was seeing my debt go up. So I started tracking my income and expenses with Quicken. And I still use Quicken today. And Quicken literally gave me, I don't know if you'd call it a degree in accounting, at least an associate's, I would say, just learning how money works and the flow of money, and, how ultimately it's kind of simple. It's like you have income and you have expense, and you want to have more income than you do expense. And the net of the result of the difference is your savings, right? And if you're spending more than you're making, you're going into debt. And if you're making more than you're spending, you are increasing your savings. And it's a simple idea, but I started just tracking, my income and expenses at a young age. And it was easy to do at that point because I didn't have that many accounts. It was a little bit of a sad endeavor because I was in debt. And the debt just kept going up for kind of a long while. But, a lot of kids, especially like I mentored a lot of my employees and taught them a lot about money and, money tracking. And a lot of times they would say, but I don't really have much going on. Do I really need to bother doing that? And I'm like, yes, you do, because it's one, it's like one of the most important habits you can have in life. But two, it's like just because it's easy to do right now, that's the perfect way to start, because like it's going to take you like a very small amount of time and once a week in maintenance doing it. But as you grow in life and you have more stuff and you're investing more and you're getting into real estate and you're doing things to improve your financial situation, well, you'll already be in the groove of it, So start while it's easy, and then it will be less of an impediment to get started, try to get started later. But I was just always doing that for myself. And my scenario was getting more complicated. I did buy a house. I was trying to do different things. And I was just kind of taught myself this bookkeeping concept. And then when we started the business, well, actually, no, when I started to run my first business, it was prior to me owning one. I got promoted at the job I had before I started the business. I got promoted up to the executive producer, which is essentially the manager of the shop. And that company had about 25 employees. And I think, its revenue was about $3.5 million. And the bookkeeper of that place was one of the original founders of the company. He was in his 70s, and he was literally doing all the bookkeeping by hand. Like his name was Roger. He was kind of a mentor of mine, and he was literally doing payroll checks for like 20 employees by hand with the book, with the little, tax table book, writing the deductions on this like old school check format. And I was like, Roger, I think like we could get you kind of into the future here. And I remember the first time that like we queued up a bunch of checks and hit print, and he literally said OF, like the word F. I don't know if I should say that online. And he was French, so he said it in this French accent. And I was like, yeah, Roger, you've been doing it the hard way for quite some time. So
that's awesome.
But the company had no books like on a computer. It was literally, if you needed financial information, you would have to go down and Roger, you'd have to wait for a couple of days, and Roger would sort of write out like a P&L for you. And I know this sounds insane, like that this was happening, and this was in 2001, 2002, but still to this day, I learned that small companies are doing very little or not even using QuickBooks or whatever for their finances. And I'm just like, are you like kidding me? It's like, it's so insane that like there are literally businesses out there that are not keeping track of their finances with like a computer program. They're using maybe a spreadsheet, I mean, that's not that common, but it does happen.
Absolutely, it does. And I think the interesting thing about that experience too is that those are the way Roger was doing it was the fundamentals. I mean, it's the exact way it needs to be done. Before there was technology that could do a lot of this on its own. But what I've heard in the industry so many times is that by having that kind of knowledge and how it works from going from, one ledger to the other, and how you see it all done in the past gives you a complete power over now when it's being done electronically.
Yeah, he really dialed in quickly because he just had a real good fundamental understanding. Sometimes when you come, when you're younger and you get into these things and you just start with the computerized aspect, you kind of don't understand like that it's all based on old ways we used to do it. And really what it's all based on is money flow. Like when I would teach bookkeeping to my, soon to be employees, my assistants essentially, and they were kind of learning QuickBooks or whatever, I'd be like, you need to just think about what's happening in the real world, and then you'll know what's happening in this computer. Like we're taking money from this physical real account, and we're sending it over to that physical real account. And all that is happening in QuickBooks is we're just taking notations of what we're doing in the real world, right? And I would always try to relate that to people that I was kind of teaching. But cut to, we set up QuickBooks and everything, and then slowly Roger started to work less, and I just became kind of the day-to-day bookkeeper. And a lot of people, like as a business owner, I read a lot of business books, and I've heard business owners say, don't waste time doing your bookkeeping, pay someone to do it, or whatever. And I always had a hard time with that because I would do all the bookkeeping for our businesses, that business. And when we started a new one, in the beginning, I would cut all the checks. I would do like literally everything. Eventually, I had assistants that would do a lot of the day-to-day kind of data entry and cut the checks and send the checks out. But at the very least, every week, if not a couple times a week, I'd be in there. And whenever I'm in there, I download transactions, I categorize stuff. And it's just this important exercise of looking around at the finances of the company, seeing what's going on, and just like being in tune to the company. I mean, the finances of the company are like the lifeblood. I mean, they tell you so many things. And the reason I was kind of calling my thing bookkeeping with benefits is that the bookkeeping is like this really important practice because it essentially unearths all the valuable data that you need to analyze your company. So if you didn't do, if there at least wasn't a partner in a company that was doing that, that would make me nervous, and I just happen to be that person who liked doing it and, was capable of doing it. So I just was always in the books and looking at our trends, looking at how we made money, looking at, what money are we making that costs less or costs more? How much surplus do we have? Can we invest surplus funds in other things, for the business to grow? I call that kind of piggybacking. It just always kept me in tune to how the company was doing. And it was something that I never really wanted to give over to some independent firm and then have to call them and schedule a call and get just a P&L and, you know what I mean, have kind of limited access to the numbers. If I see that we're spending a lot of money in a certain category, I want to be able to quickly go in and decipher what exactly have we been buying. That seems like a lot. What have we done there? So the bookkeeping just was always super critical and important to me in managing the business and assessing the business's health.
And now you're doing that you're kind of being that person now for multiple companies.
Yeah. Well, what I kind of started to learn was after I left and, I continue, and I still do it for my old company. It's called Therapy Studios. Anyone can check it out if they want. Therapystudios.com is the website address. I still do it for them. They pay me as a consultant. And also we own the building that the business is in. So I'm still partners with my old partners in the building, of which I also manage the finances. But I was friends of mine who I would talking to that eventually asked me if I would help them. What I kind of saw was that, well, some businesses, in our business, I think in every business, you have what I call the product and the sales. Those are the two fundamental components of business. And the product could be, anything. In our case, the product was the talent of our artists. And obviously, we all know what sales is. And without those two things, it's hard to have a business. I mean, sometimes your product is so darn good that it just sells itself. And congratulations to you if that's the case. But most companies need both product and sales in order to thrive. And some companies, though, the owners of the business are both product oriented. So in creative companies that I often am working with, the two partners would both be creative directors. So they're co-creative directors. They're dealing with the clients. They're the product. They're the reason clients are coming to the shop. But they don't have a partner that's financially, oriented. And maybe they aren't at a place where they can have a full-time CFO or something like that. And in those cases where they're just not minding the till, so to speak, when times are good, it's not a big deal because there's always money in the checking account for whatever reason. They seem to always be covering their overhead. But, in tough times, all of a sudden the checking account balance gets close to zero and they don't have no idea why. And because they just don't pay attention to it. Maybe they have a bookkeeper that's, off-site or maybe comes in once a week, but that bookkeeper is not particularly worried about being kind of a CFO type character. And that's a lot what I, think about the bookkeeping role and the ways a bookkeeping business can grow. It's you need to take the opportunity that is there to be a CFO type person for that business if they don't have one. And a lot of times with small businesses, they don't. So they kind of looked at me and said, hey, you know, we really could use someone of your skill set and knowledge and willingness to also do bookkeeping. And we kind of get this 2-for-1. And if we can do it in a way where you work part-time, you know, because obviously we don't necessarily have the money to like pay you a full-time salary, they're like, that would be amazing. And, you know, quickly it just grew. I think I now do have about 7 businesses, and I work still part-time, you know, it's tax season right now. And I basically, obviously prep all their stuff for the taxes, but being that I put myself more in a CFO category, I do the tax planning for them for the CPA. So I liaise for the clients with the CPA, and I go to the CPA not only with prepared financials for the year, but I actually also do a tax plan to go along with those financials so that the CPA like kind of essentially knows what they need to do. And if the CPA can bring more to the table, great. But the truth be told, most of the time they don't bring more to the table than I already know, because I've taken it upon myself to educate myself in taxes, which are just a huge component. I mean, taxes are a huge component of the money that is going out of everyone's pocket every year. It's probably your biggest bill ultimately as an individual. So you need to educate yourself and do tax planning. And I've kind of, as a way of being good with money over the years and ways to keep more of the hard-earned money, you know, that I've made, I've educated myself about taxes and ways to be tax efficient. So I bring all that kind of knowledge to bear. And, you know, I guess the bookkeeping thing, I should say, like, in addition to the business clients, what naturally has kind of flowed is I now am managing the finances of some of the owners of the businesses, because as a former business owner and someone who was always trying to figure out how to, you know, not overpay in taxes and keep the money that I've made, you know, like I said, I kind of educated myself. And I really learned that for small business owners, particularly, you know, your money enters your world at the business level, right? But it really only becomes like kind of a real income at the end of the year after you've done, you know, or the end of the following year's tax period, when you filed your taxes and you know how much you're going to pay in taxes. The end result after tax is how much you've really made, right? It doesn't really matter, you know, how much you gross. I mean, certainly it matters, you know, in the sense that you have to have sales, but what you keep of the money you make as a business owner is ultimately the most important thing. And you need to factor in planning for your taxes. So being I'm in this, you know, financial conversation with these business owners all the time, we're always, you know, we kind of start by talking about the business and the bottom line income of the business. And then I say, well, just FYI, well, that net result is going to pass down into your personal world. And you need to think about like your tax efficiency and what you're going to have to owe at, you know, come tax time next year. And the only way to do that is to do good financial planning and bookkeeping for your personal life. So that's why I always say, you know, on my website and to anyone I'm working with, you need to do your personal finances just like you do your business finances. You need to do bookkeeping. You need to track them in a computer software, and you need to think about, you know, how to be, you know, most efficient with them, particularly in the tax category, but, you know, even in however you're spending your money in your life, you know. So I look at this, you know, money in, you know, in kind of money, I guess, into the savings account, so to speak, as this one sort of, you know, holistic thing. And I just take it upon myself, even though I'm just the business kind of bookkeeper, to educate my clients about how that all works and how we need to like focus on them preparing and saving for their future, you know, because you know, the funny thing is at the end of the day, whether you own a business or not, and it means, you know, means whatever it means to you and this, that, and the other, we are all, slowly working towards kind of like a later in life scenario, whether you want to call that retirement or some version of financial independence or whatever. So it all does essentially boil down to that. So if you're not really looking at the whole picture, like money enters my business, at the top, but it becomes like real for me, after I pay my taxes at the end of the year, and that pot of money goes towards my, future time of retirement, we'll say. If you're not thinking about all of that at the same time, you're ultimately going to shortchange yourself on the retirement piece of the pie. Did that make sense?
It makes total sense. And, there's a couple of things. Number one on that point is thinking with the end in mind. Often people don't think about the end in mind. They think about like what's in front of me right now, make my business, have it be successful, make money there. But what's the point? Why are you doing this? Where are you trying to get to? If it all doesn't connect, it's like saying, well, gee, I'd like to go to Paris. Well, I'm going to take a car and just start driving to Paris. Well, eventually you're going to run into, well, wait a second, this isn't working because you got to get across the ocean. So thinking that long term and connecting all the dots. I think often in life we work with multiple people that have multiple expertises, and they're not working together. They're not taking you from one to the end, right?
Exactly.
I really see that as being one of the valuable things that you offer is not here, we're going to do your bookkeeping. We're going to do your bookkeeping. We're going to understand what that all means in your business. We're going to understand how the tax implications work. We're going to partner and make sure that your CPA is on track with everything that you're doing and have really clear. And then you're also looking at the personal end of things around, okay, this business is doing this for you. How is it going to impact you from a tax perspective? How's it going to set you up for the future? What are your future plans? I mean, really, really fantastic, really valuable. Wow. This episode has been absolutely remarkable. We took up an entire hour. And so what we decided to do was split this episode in two. So the rest of this conversation is going to be next week in the next episode. So you'll have to wait for all the great advice and stories and roadmaps that Joe gives us next week. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.